anatomy. So as I said, we're going to go over some calligraphy information because the scripts that you know are based on calligraphy, humanist. And so we're going to talk about the different styles, how things flow, what makes things look formal versus informal. As a typographer, I would say I'm pretty expressive, but I've only arrived there through study and practice. So we're going to show you a couple of different styles. We're going to start with expressive because it's kind of closest to your hand, closest to your style. What happens with expressive, the strokes sometimes illegible, more rushed, imperfect, right? But there's emotion, there's style. This is like a really stylish thing. However, like Lord and Taylor, you can't necessarily read the mark, but you know the mark. And so this type of treatment works really well when you have an iconic brand that is associated with illegible mark, because you're associating it more as a word mark, as an image, and less as typography. So here's where we start transitioning from expressive into humanist. And I'll just kind of skip forward a quick moment. And this is where we're going to be talking about humanist, which is much more derived from calligraphy, whereas we're talking about being derived from the hand with expressive. So this is kind of in the middle. Many of the word marks that you'll be working with today are from this category, where today you won't have the time to refine a humanist mark to a great detail and precision, which is what is required. But here it's taking it a step beyond your expressive hand and really starting to create form and repetition of shapes. You start to see and understand the stress and the angle and how it reads. It changes, whether it's more upright, whether it's more angled, how you're responding to it, the legibility. And here's also where you start to see a lot of swashing and flourishing start to come as a complement to your typography so that it can enhance it and create more of a mark, create emphasis. You also see that there is an imperfection still in these marks, but you see more stroke variation than when it's expressive. And the stroke variation is where you start leaning more towards humanist and developing a more calligraphic mark. It's the change between the thick downstroke and the thinner loop. It's contrast that creates a little bit more elegance. And so you'll see that when you start getting to humanist, this is really what sets these types of marks apart and why they look more formal. They look more finished, very symmetrical, repetitive. The stress and the angle is very consistent, removing more of that personality of the hand of the person who created the mark and really spending more time, hours and hours, refining all of those details. It's also where you're going to see more of the flourishes becoming fancier at the end of John Hancock, the start of the C in Cadillac, leading in. You're going to see the use of initial caps. Same here. There's some initial caps going on here. Initial caps lead off your mark. They give you a place to start. They establish a style. Maybe you want something a little bit more streamlined throughout the whole word mark, but your first letter has a really special, a little bit more attention. Maybe it has a little bit more flourish to it. It's larger usually than the rest of the word, but still in proportion visually. So we're going to take you through some of the glossary. The glossary I'll pull up from time to time when we're talking about things. We're going to go over the different pieces, parts of the letter, and it's so that when we're talking about it, we can make sure that we are all using the same language. So, our first page of terms, walking you through from number 1 all the way through number 11. Number 1 at the top is an arm. So you'll be definitely working with your arms today when you're working on your initial caps, or maybe some of your other letter forms. you're going to want to connect your swashes possibly to the arm. Number 2 is the stem, and that's the downstroke and the slope. And when we're talking about calligraphy, if you're using a nib, this would be a great place to create really nice thickness and then turn your pen and have a nice contrast of the thin line. And so the stem is going to be a really important part of establishing the rhythm of your word mark, the stress that you're going to follow for everything. Swash at the end, you're going to be, I'm sure everyone's going to want to get into swashes. We have a page or two that Michael added that are really cool and show you how crazy you can really get. But the swash extending off the end gives you an opportunity to create flourish, to create connection, to create additional lines that frame up your word mark. Number 4, inside of that bowl of the Y, there's a descender on 5 coming off the P. Now, descenders are sometimes another opportunity to swash and flourish and connect. Sometimes they're just a great way to break up all of that line work and create just a really beautiful linear mark. The bowl on the P. So you're going to see bowls on lots of letter forms that have that element, the G, the P. And when you're creating your typography, and we're going to go into this more, you'll find that some of these repeating shapes that we're calling out here are going to be really helpful when you're dissecting a typeface to deconstruct it. Because if you're creating a P, you can create a G. You need to flip it and mirror it. And you're going to start to see the rhythm of these letter forms, how you can dissect and deconstruct to create the new. 7 is the counter. It's inside of the O. Lots of different ways to create the counter. In this example, it's an open counter, just ever so slightly. A lot of examples of O's, you won't have any opening into that. It'll just be a beautiful knockout negative shape inside of a beautiful inky dark shape. On the G, you'll see the loop on the bottom. The inspiration for all of this is the loop. That's why we are here today. Transitions is something we're going to spend time with as you're going through your exercise. That's something I think as a beginner is the most difficult to achieve naturally. I think the transition is what comes with practice, and we're going to talk about practice a lot, but the muscle memory and understanding the connection and the flow, and that's your personality, how you connect. So that's your transition. Shoulder up on the beautiful edge of the H, and then following into the vertex on the Y. And if you look at that again, kind of echoing. So as you're deconstructing, you can start thinking about how to place these elements. So you see a flourish, that's what everybody wants to get into. Number 12. We're going to do a demo of flourish somewhat towards the beginning so that you can start playing around with that because it's fun. 13 is the apex. So this is the tippy top of your letter form. This one has a little bit of a fun loop on the tip of it, so it's a cool stylistic choice. 15 is the I, so compared to the counter, number 7, you see the I has a different entrance. It fills the top of the E, but it also really encapsulates the whole area. When you start looking at that kind of block out of the form, you do see the similarity between number 7 and number 15. So again, we're looking at shapes that echo each other and how to isolate them. 17, okay, sorry, I missed it. Open counter is the open area on the bottom of the E. So you're going from, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. 15 is the I. The I is the upper part of the E, and then the open counter is the open bottom part, whereas you're just regular counter in the O. 17, you've got the hook. So that's, again, your hook is not your stem. Your hook is not your swash. So all these little pieces parts is what I'm going to be a real stickler about. Just kidding. 18 is your dot, or tittle. That's a funny one. You pick. You can call it either one. You've got the leg extending off of the K. got a transition on your cue. Now the spine that you're seeing in 21, that's different from the stem. On the spine, you're going to see a curve just like a spine. So a lot of this anatomy really does translate to the human form. And so if you're confused, you can think about it that way. Looking at the beak on the tip of the S, it's another way to exit. And then we're looking at a cross stroke. We're now moving into anatomy and geometry, kind of side by side. So we're taking some of the familiar terms that you just learned, and then we're also going to now incorporate some of the measurements so that you can help form your letters without using deconstructed typeface or pre-existing word mark, which you'll be using today. But these are some of the ways that you can start to think about forming structure. Now this is a serif, so this is going a different example, but if you look at how the forms are being made, there are shapes that are being superimposed and transposed to create the same echo and the same shapes and the same proportions. And this is a great tool that you can use with script. You're going to see it when we do the demo, that pulling apart and deconstructing, but then also using your own little spacers, circles, squares, diagonal lines to help you determine what the right decision is to create your letter form. It's really helpful.
The thing you want to be aware of, though, is, like this slide shows, when you get drawing, guys, is you're creating a positive character, right? But your mind should be aware of the negative space, circles that are representing the negative curve or the space. That balance that you're drawing, a positive stroke, is moving around the negative space, if you will, right? And so that kind of feeling is going to create the flow of how your script is, going to turn out. And that kind of feeling is what I'm trying to get across. And even though these look in the art kind of more of an engineering drawing, it's representing, those circles are representing really the negative feeling that you need to incorporate when you're doing script, if you follow me on that.
So this is really your first body height chart, which is what we're going to show you next. Body height chart's a little bit more sophisticated so that you have some options as a typographer, but it's really just a fancy version of this. So proportions are going to be a big deal today and all the time, and it's going to help you achieve a more finished look, obviously more consistency. The X height, which Michael was talking about, you see kind of right straight through the middle.
Yeah, that'd be the yellow line. The middle yellow line.
Middle yellow.
Right.
The baseline, everything's resting there. And aside from that, you see a bunch of variation. So there's some other lines that you can follow, and this is where you start to make your rules, because as you place a body height chart over any and all of your script fonts, you're going to see total variation.
So guys, I don't know how versed you are with script, but you're used to working with Roman type on a daily basis, serif and sans serif, right? And with contemporary typefaces, the X height is really large now, especially if you're using, ones that have been designed in the last 10 years, right? But with script, what's common is the X height is usually smaller, it's shorter, and there's more distance between the X height and the cap height than you're used to being with Roman typefaces, right? So with script, it's more typical to have this much variation between the X height and the cap height, like this example is showing. And as you start to look at more script typefaces, you'll start to notice that after a while. Just like the brand she was showing you before, where I was showing you John Hancock versus Cartier, right?
So cap height is where the top of your initial cap or any large cap is going to end. Descender is where all of the bottoms of your loops are going to hit. We also have just the ascender, which is, your H's, possibly T's, depending on how long you make them.